Born on May 5, 1976, Sonia Mejia achieved the American dream at a young age. By 2006, at the age of 29, she was living with her common-law husband and her 8-year-old son and was 6 months pregnant with her second child. They lived in the Pleasant Fairway Apartments, located at approximately 11th West and 3900 South in Taylorsville, Utah. To support her family, she worked part-time at a local McDonald's. But the dream would be shattered one fateful morning in early February 2006. Sonia was home alone on February 9, 2006. At around 6 p.m., her husband returned home from work and made a gruesome discovery. He called the authorities after finding his wife breathless and unresponsive on the floor. The crime scene clearly pointed towards a homicide, which investigators concluded to be a robbery gone wrong. An autopsy on Sonia's body later showed that she had been sexually assaulted before being killed by strangulation. Tragically, Sonia's 24-week-old fetus also did not survive. Multiple items were missing from the apartment, which included 3 pieces of jewelry that belonged to Sonia: a heart-shaped ruby ring, a diamond ring, and a religious pendant fastened to a gold chain. Her car, a gold 4-door Ford Escort, was also stolen from the apartment and was located 4 days later in the parking lot of the Fairfield Inn at 590 West and 4500 South. Unidentified fingerprints and DNA evidence were discovered inside her apartment in the form of a bag of Cheetos and a Coke bottle, items that were not supposed to be there. So investigators concluded that they must have belonged to the killer. Unexpectedly, the investigators found a witness after interrogating neighbors for information. At around 11:30 a.m. on the day of the murder, a neighbor saw a Hispanic male talking to Sonia at the front door of her residence. The witness then observed him entering the apartment and assaulting Sonia. The man grabbed Sonia by the throat and struck her with such force that she fell to the floor, and then the assailant kicked the door shut. Sadly, even after witnessing the violent attack, the neighbor failed to alert the authorities, which ultimately cost the young mother her life. The man was described as a short-haired Hispanic male with a medium build, approximately 5 feet 6 inches in height and 20 to 29 years in age. Though it was deemed enough evidence to identify a suspect, police were unable to do so despite having fingerprints and a physical description of a killer. The authorities believed it to be a random attack until 2 years later, when the killer struck again on the same day and in the same area. Damiana Castillo was born in Mexico City, Mexico on March 18, 1950. Little is known about her early life, but she was a loving mother and grandmother. She was known to have a very gentle attitude and shared kind words and blessings with everyone she crossed paths with. One neighbor described her as a prompt lady who had never been late for work and never forgot to attend church. Her 2 children, 1 son and 1 daughter, and her 5 grandchildren adored her to death. In 2008, 57-year-old Damiana lived at an apartment at 4000 South Redwood Road in Salt Lake City, Utah, just a mile from where Sonia Mejia used to live. On a tragic February morning, police would be called to witness a horrific crime scene. On February 9, 2008, Damiana's son went to check up on his mother after she did not show up at church like she did every Sunday. There, poor Damiana was lying in her apartment, partially covered with a pillow with ligature marks on her neck. Police noted the signs of a fight in the apartment, including an overturned table. Damiana's pocketbook and wallet were found abandoned on a couch, and her jewelry box had also been disturbed. DNA was collected from the victim's neck, while a latent fingerprint was found on her purse. At first, this murder was believed to be a separate attack similar to Sonia's. However, excluding the age factor, these 2 murders had extreme similarities between them. But from 2009, investigators conclusively believed that it was the deeds of one person after the biological evidence linked both slayings. Nonetheless, both cases could not be solved at the time due to the DNA and fingerprints not matching a person present on the criminal database. In 2010, prosecutors used the DNA profile to charge the unknown suspect with 2 counts of aggravated murder, referring to him as John Doe, since his identity could not be specified. The killer earned his name as the February 9th killer, indicating the date of the crimes. Though the killer was not considered a serial killer, for years, police in West Valley City and Taylorsville would have extra officers on patrol on February 9th in order to prevent a third slaying. Over the years, these 2 cases received much-needed media attention, but no particular breakthrough could be earned through that. It would all change in 2016, when the FBI-maintained automated fingerprint identification system reported that prints taken from the scene had been matched to a person. Juan Antonio Arreola Murillo Arreola is a 41-year-old Mexican resident who was living in the U.S. in 2008. According to court records, he was arrested by Salt Lake City police in July of the same year for a fraud and theft case and pleaded guilty. The address listed for Arreola in the 2008 case was the same apartment complex where Sonia was killed. However, he had multiple other addresses listed in court records, and it was unclear if Arreola was indeed a neighbor of either Sonia or Damiana. Arreola was deported from the U.S. back to his home country Mexico in October 2008 and has been living there since. In 2017, prosecutors amended the John Doe charges and the court issued an arrest warrant for Arreola. Although the killer's identity was unfolded to the investigators, it was not public due to the suspect living in another jurisdiction. The charging documents were unsealed after he had been extradited to Utah from Mexico. He was charged with 3 counts of aggravated murder, 2 counts of aggravated burglary, and 1 count of aggravated robbery. If found guilty, he could face life in prison without the possibility of parole. It was in 2002 when Greg Allen's life changed forever. On the trail of what had been a messy divorce, and even messier custody battle for his 4-year-old daughter, Sabrina, things had just started to look up. Greg, an engineering scientist, had been granted primary custody, and after months of fighting with his ex-wife, Dara, things had just started to get easier. They were falling into a good routine, and the parents were beginning the road to cooperative co-parenting. Greg brought Sabrina to her mom on April 19, 2002 for the weekend. It had been agreed upon that Darla would return Sabrina on Sunday evening, but she never showed up. Greg recalled the last goodbye before the drop-off, and Sabrina had looked up at him and said, "Daddy, don't ever forget me." At the time, he thought it had been a silly little exchange, but it turned into an almost sinister warning. In the early stages of the divorce, Dar had often threatened to take Sabrina away. Dar was from Mexico and had wanted to return there with Sabrina since the beginning of their divorce. When Greg was granted primary custody, the courts had agreed that Sabrina would stay in Texas. There had been several wild attempts during the divorce to convince the little girl to lie in order to be granted protective orders from Greg. Sabrina had even been taken from school once by Child Protective Services, when she allegedly told social worker, "My daddy hits my mommy. That's a lie my mommy told me to say." Greg called the police 2 hours after the time of drop-off had passed. He'd made several attempts to reach Dara, but all efforts went to voicemail. But by then, it was too late, and Dar and Sabrina were long gone. In addition to the police and Texas Rangers, Greg also hired a private detective. They tracked their whereabouts to the Texas-Mexican border, and they were able to confirm that Dar and Sabrina had purchased bus tickets to Mexico. Greg alerted all of the missing children's agencies and started his own website to generate tips. He also took a leave of absence from his job and went to Mexico City, where he tried to search for his daughter himself. Greg quickly learned that his lack of Spanish skills was holding him back, so he enrolled in an immersive Spanish class to learn the language as quickly as possible. Greg had been in Mexico for almost a year when he got his first solid tip. A teacher reached out to him and said that she'd met a student who she believed was his daughter. She was blonde, the same age, and didn't speak much Spanish. She'd been called Blanca because of her fair hair, and the teacher said that Blanca had been extremely distressed. She would get upset because she didn't understand the other children and begged the teacher to help her find her daddy in Texas. Only then did teacher look online and see Greg's website. She had looked Greg up and was shocked to discover that Greg was only 30 minutes away from his daughter. Greg bought the information to the U.S. police and officers in Mexico, but because of the need to coordinate by the time both agencies worked out a game plan, Dar had taken Sabrina out of the school and relocated. Greg was devastated, but continued the search for his daughter. He stayed in Mexico, took every opportunity to get his case in the media, and offered a $20,000 reward for information. Greg eventually remarried. He had fallen in love with the woman teaching him Spanish, and the couple married after 3 years. They now have 3 children together. 12 years after his daughter had been kidnapped, there was a new tip brought in from one of the private investigators Greg had hired. They located Dara in a small town outside Mexico City. They staked at the apartment for 2 weeks until they confirmed what appeared to be a teenage girl in the apartment. She had dark hair and was now 17, but showed no signs of physical harm. This time officers moved quickly. They arrested Dara and had Sabrina. She was put on a plane and sent back to the U.S. Sabrina had not gone to school since 2003, had her blonde hair dyed dark to conceal her identity, and had not been allowed to leave the apartment for fear of being recognized. Dara had undergone several operations to also change her appearance. Sabrina was not immediately released to Greg and his family. She underwent extensive therapy to work through the many traumas she'd experienced for the last 12 years. She'd been confused and frightened about the relocation, and the years of hearing bad things about her father made her not want to see Greg. In fact, she'd been told he had committed suicide and abandoned her. Eventually, with family trauma counseling, they were able to rekindle their relationship, and Sabrina moved into Greg's home that he shared with his wife, Mariana, and their children. Dara was extradited back to the US, where a judge sentenced her to 6 years in prison for aggravated kidnapping and interfering with child custody. Dara's sister also testified against her sister, citing strange, unhinged behavior, such as writing to their elderly mother, pretending to be their deceased father. Greg said in a statement, quote, "Sorry for all the silence, but we have been necessarily focused on healing. The past year has been quite a roller coaster ride, but I like to think that we are past the hardest parts. I'm happy to report that I have a strong and growing relationship with my daughter, and we still have trials ahead, but we are doing well." Kimberly Ann Morrow was born January 21st, 1969. She lived in Maine and went by the nickname Kim. She was in gymnastics and cheerleading at High School. On May 10th, 1986, 17-year-old Kim had plans to attend her high school's junior prom, but changed her mind at the last minute after she had an argument with her boyfriend, Mike Staples, because he had cheated on her with her friend. Instead, she went out with her friend, Rhonda Breton. Rhonda's 25-year-old boyfriend Darren Jodry and his 25-year-old friend Brian Inman. She stopped by her house on Jewel Street at around midnight, used the bathroom, and told her sister that she would be back in an hour, leaving her purse and all her belongings behind. Their parents were across the street from the home at the VFW at the time. Darren had gotten a new 1986 Trans Am, and Kim was then seen getting into it and has never been seen again. Apparently, Kim, her friend Rhonda, and the two men had spent the day riding around in the new car. Although it was Darren's car, he was clocked in at work that night from 10 p.m. until 6 the next morning. So Brian most likely was the one driving the car at the time. Darren being at work has not been verified because coworkers were known for clocking each other in and out. It is believed that Brian and Rhonda were in the car when Kim left again with them around midnight. Ryan later stated that he dropped her off a few hours later, stating that Kim requested to be let out of the car half a mile from her home. She allegedly claimed she wanted to be alone and walked the remaining distance to her house because she was still upset about the argument she had with her boyfriend days before. Her family does not believe his story though, stating that she was terrified of the dark and the area was pitch black at the time. Her family said it was several months before police showed any interest at all in her disappearance and initially labeled her as a runaway. Kim's father says he has maintained contact with Brian over the years since Kim's disappearance in hopes of finding out what happened to his daughter. At one point, Brian told Kim's father that the two had consensual sex the night Kim went missing. He also admitted to drinking alcohol and doing cocaine with another man that night. Kim's family believes she may have experimented with drugs to try and fit in, and some pills were found in the purse that she had left at the home that night. One of Kim's sisters speculates she died accidentally on the night of her disappearance and the people she was with covered it up. Her father also believes she died within hours of leaving home. Another person of interest is Calvin Tidwell. He was at the party the night Kim went missing and was allegedly heavy into drug deals, especially supplying the teens with them at the time in return for favors. The class ring that Kim kept on her necklace that belonged to her boyfriend Mike, with his name inscribed on it, was later discovered to be in Calvin's mother's cupboard. He later admitted while in prison for an unrelated crime to having the ring, stating it was traded for a bottle of alcohol, but denied having anything to do with her disappearance. In 2015, dozens of police searched a 5-acre property around the mobile home belonging to Brian, hoping to find evidence in her disappearance, but the search turned up nothing. In 2019, police excavated a concrete slab at a property in Livermore related to Calvin, a spot where Kim had been rumored to be buried for over 30 years, but again found nothing. They also searched 2 gold mines in Livermore with permission of the landowner. But prior to completing the search, the landowner called it off, and the search was never completed. The statements given by Rhonda, Darren, and Brian have changed many times over the years, especially from her friend Rhonda. She had told investigators that she was not close friends with Kim, despite there being many letters the girls had written back and forth, and they had spent a lot of time together for several months. Rhonda later died in 2009 by a hit and on the night of March 5, 2022, Police were called because of a house fire in the center of Leeuwarden, the Frisian capital in the Netherlands. The fire was quickly extinguished, but officers found the body of a 21-year-old woman in one of the apartments above a tattoo parlor. She was stabbed multiple times with a sharp object. The woman was Mika Ort, an American student who was studying leisure and events management at NHL's Stenden University of Applied Sciences. Mika was of Dutch heritage and was excited about her new life in the Netherlands. She had recently moved into the apartment, which was around 90 minutes away from Amsterdam, following a breakup with her boyfriend of 2 years. Mika had recently been matched with a new date on Tinder. He reportedly became quickly violent and started stalking her after she told him she didn't want to continue seeing him because she got back together with her ex. That Tinder date revealed to be 27-year-old Thomas R., who was caught by the German police a few hours after the murder. He was found in Leer, a small town across the Dutch borders. He was turned in by his parents, who alerted local police after he contacted them while fleeing, confessing to them what he'd done. They told law enforcement they were perplexed by their son's behavior and were left deeply shaken after receiving his call. Police reports showed that Thomas first threw an incendiary bomb at the apartment building. They suspected he started the fire to lure the residents out. A fight broke out in the stairwell between him and 2 male residents who were left mildly injured. He then climbed the stairs and attacked Mika in her apartment, stabbing her to death. In an interview with a Dutch newspaper, Michael, Mika's ex-boyfriend, said that they were thinking about rekindling their relationship, which he believed may have sent Thomas over the edge. He'd started stalking her and even installed a GPS tracker on her bicycle to keep tabs on her. He also harassed her by sending intimidating messages via WhatsApp. Thomas R. is now awaiting extradition to the Netherlands, where he will likely be charged with Mika Ort's murder. What do you think about it? Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. Kristen Denise Smart was born on February 20th, 1977 in Augsburg, Germany. She and her family moved to Stockton, California when she was a child. In 1996, Kristen enrolled at a California Polytechnic State University. On May 25th, she attended a party at a frat house. At approximately 2 a.m., she was found passed out on a neighbor's lawn by 2 fellow students, Cheryl Anderson and Tim Davis. They helped Kristen to her feet and decided to walk her back to her nearby dorm. Another student, Paul Flores, joined the group and offered to help get Kristen there safely. After a while of walking, Tim Davis left since he lived off campus. Thereafter, Anderson left and taught Flores to get Kristen to her dorm as he lived closest to her. That would be the last time Kristen was ever seen alive. She was reported missing to the university police department. They believed Kristen went on an unannounced vacation, but when she did not return, the investigation started. Paul Flores was questioned. He said that after he and Kristen reached his dorm, he left her to walk back to her dorm on her own. Investigators have always seen Paul Flores as the main suspect. Between 1996 and 2007, investigators have conducted numerous searches at houses belonging to the Flores family. An earring that potentially belonged to Kristen was found by a tenant at a former residence of Paul Flores' mom. In September 2016, investigators excavated an area on the campus. They did find a few items had they decided to analyze. No more information on those items have been made public. In 2021, investigators started searching at Paul Flores' home once again. They used ground-penetrating radar and dogs. Numerous items of interest were found. This included a car belonging to Paul Flores' father, Ruben Flores. On April 13, 2021, Paul Flores and Ruben Flores were arrested by the San Luis Obispo County Sheriff's Office in relation to the case. Paul Flores is being held without bail, and his 8-year-old father under $250,000 bail. San Luis Obispo County Sheriff Ian Parkinson said that he could not reveal what new evidence led to the break in the case. He also said that he is confident that he will find Kristen's remains. Kristen's parents made a statement after hearing about the news. Could have held his horrible secret for nearly 25 years. Denying us the chance to allow our daughter to rest is an unrelenting and unforgiving pain. We now put our faith in the justice system and move forward, comforted in the knowledge that Kristen has been held in the hearts of so many and that she has not been forgotten. We are pleased that Kristen's case has now moved to the District Attorney's Office, where we know we will be in good hands, and look forward to the day when there will be justice for Kristen. To heal, we must remember not only Kristen, but also every heart that carried Kristen and our family in theirs. Kristen's story is ultimately one of unwavering commitment, resilience, and immense gratitude. Just an hour after I finished the video, more information has been made public. San Luis Obispo County District Attorney Dan Dow said that Paul Flores took the life of Kristen after he tried to assault her. He said that it took place in Paul Flores' dorm room and that Ruben Flores helped dispose of Kristen's body. Dan also claims that they now know where her body was buried. Pamela Halapainen grew up in the South Porcupine neighborhood of Timmins, a mining town in northern Ontario. Her mother, Holly Kotuk, was Inuit and her family was originally from Nunavut. Like many Indigenous individuals in Canada, Holly was sent to a boarding school. She arrived at the school at the age of 14, and a year later, she became pregnant with Pamela's older sister, Vanessa Brusso. Pamela was born 2 years after Vanessa. Holly did her best to actively raise her daughters in their Inuit culture and teach them to embrace their heritage in their daily lives as much as possible. Since there were no other Inuit and Timmins, she was active in the local Indigenous community, the Cree. Holly would eventually become the president of the Timmins Native Friendship Center. Pamela and Vanessa were very close growing up and relied heavily on one another. They grew up in poverty and therefore had very few toys, so they used their imaginations to make up games and activities together. Pamela was outgoing and outspoken. She had a big personality, which was also reflected in how deeply she cared for others and the great lengths she would go to help anyone who needed anything. Pamela left school prior to graduating high school so she could go to work. Following a brief stint as a waitress, she found a job in a call center where she excelled. By 2003, 22-year-old Pamela had a common-law spouse with whom she had 2 sons. She was a devoted mother. Pamela and Vanessa remained close as adults, and it was common for them to speak multiple times a day. On December 13, 2003, Pamela asked Vanessa if she could babysit her 2 boys that night. Vanessa was unable to, so Pamela made other arrangements. Vanessa went to Pamela's house on December 15th, but no one was home. She continued visiting the house over the next few days to see her sister and drop off Christmas presents for her nephews, but no one was ever at the house. Vanessa assumed that they had gone to spend Christmas with Pamela's common-law spouse's family. Pamela did not call Vanessa on Christmas Day, which Vanessa was very upset about. On December 26th, Vanessa was able to speak with Pamela's landlord. They had not seen the family either. At this point, Vanessa was still under the assumption that her sister was with her common-law spouse's family and simply failing to call her. Vanessa learned that she was wrong on New Year's Eve. That day, Vanessa and her mother were at a bingo hall when a woman came up to them and asked if they had heard about Pamela. They said they did not, and the woman told them that Pamela had left her common-law spouse. Vanessa and Holly then asked where Pamela's children were. They were still with their father. This was an immediate indication that something was not right to Vanessa and Holly. It was conceivable that Pamela would leave her spouse. There was not even a remote possibility, however, that Pamela would go anywhere without her sons. Vanessa and Holly went to police to report Pamela missing. While they made the report as soon as they realized that something was wrong, it had been more than 2 weeks since anyone had seen Pamela. She had attended a house party on the evening of December 13th and had left it in the early morning hours of 14th after reportedly getting into an argument with her common-law spouse and saying she would walk home. Police were not concerned about Pamela's disappearance, telling Vanessa and Holly that Pamela was probably out drinking and would reappear in a few days, a conclusion with no supporting evidence. Vanessa and Holly, understandably frustrated by this disregard for Pamela's well-being, began their own search, organizing friends and family members to create and distribute flyers and to search for Pamela. For months after Pamela went missing, when police finally began investigating Pamela's disappearance, they told her family that they believed Pamela was a sex worker in Hamilton, Ontario. They supported this claim with 2 nude pictures Pamela had taken of herself, presumably for her common-law spouse, that had been found on her personal computer. The case was eventually taken over by the Ontario Provincial Police, but the investigator assigned to the case faced allegations of attempted murder and arson. 2013. The case was sent back to police in Timmins, who told Pamela's sister Vanessa that the case was not active. Pamela's mother, Holly, passed away on December 31, 2007, exactly 4 years to the day after she reported her daughter missing to police. Vanessa Brusso continues to advocate and search for her sister. She is active on social media, sharing her sister's story as well as stories of the challenges facing Indigenous people in Canada. Kent in the UK is the location of New Ash Green, a post-war development known for its strong community spirit and sense of belonging. Among its residents was Sarah Walgreen, a 46-year-old who had a close-knit family that frequently gathered for lunch, shopping, and vacations. Her mother, and noted that Sarah had a deep concern for others and always defended the underdog. Sarah was a dedicated mother to her 5 children, who were the focal point of her life. She made special efforts for birthdays and holidays. Her 2 sons, Jack and Louis, were from a previous relationship, and she had 3 more children with her partner, 39-year-old Ben Locomer. Sarah balanced her job as a beautician with evening and weekend work while raising her children. Ben, originally from Greenwich, had moved to Mallorca in the early 2000s with aspirations of becoming a pilot. The pair had met in December 2004 on a dating website. He made a good impression with Sarah's 2 sons, and Sarah decided to leave her job and she and her 2 boys would move to Mallorca to start afresh with Ben. But the happiness didn't last long. Due to her being unable to speak Spanish, she couldn't find a job, and this, coupled with her homesickness, made it very difficult for Sarah. Ben also wasn't able to become a pilot, so instead worked at the airport. They subsequently decided to move back to the UK, having already welcomed their first child. After settling into a new 4-bedroom home, 22 Baysy Shore in New Ash Green, Ben began working as a taxi driver, and Sarah would work as a beauty therapist. But the issues in the relationship began to show, with the pair arguing often. Sarah eventually decided to call time on the relationship, and in response, Ben threw her and her 2 sons out whilst keeping the 3 children they had together with him. Ben had arranged a court hearing for the very next morning in which he said Sarah had abandoned her children and consequently he was awarded custody. Sarah was unable to defend herself as she was unaware as to what was happening. Sarah was devastated. She and her eldest 2 children went to live with her mother and stepfather. The family saved every penny so they could be able to go and see a solicitor for legal advice. And in August 2016, she would be awarded full custody of the children. It was also around this time that her personal life began to move in a more positive direction when she met Neil James. Sarah met Neil on a dating app in 2016, and their relationship would go from strength to strength, culminating in an engagement. But Sarah was worried that if she tried to move in with Neil, Ben would battle her for custody. In 2018, she offered Ben the opportunity for them to live in the house together and co-parent their children despite their romantic relationship coming to an end, something her family had begged her not to do. This wasn't by any means an ideal solution, as emotions between them were still running high, so Sarah decided to try and buy Ben's share of the house from him. Sarah had taken her children to school in the morning before heading to work to see her clients. She was also incredibly excited and happy as she had been able to secure a new, higher-paying job. At around 8 p.m., Sarah was seen coming home and heading inside. She sent several text messages, including to Neil. One message to a friend read, "There's always something to look forward to. You've just got to open your eyes and dream." The last text message was sent at 10 p.m. before she headed to bed. The next day was an incredibly special one as it was one of her children's birthdays and, like always, she had planned for it. As the morning rolled around, Neil sent her a text message, but Sarah didn't reply. As the hours continued to tick by, Sarah still hadn't responded. Neil decided to reach out to Ben to see if he had seen her. Ben replied saying he thought Sarah was with him as he hadn't seen her either. Neil called Sarah's family and explained that he had been trying to get hold of Sarah since the morning but hadn't been able to make contact with her. Sarah could sometimes forget to charge her phone or accidentally leave it in the car, so her mother decided to call her too. But like Neil, she couldn't get hold of her. One of Sarah's sons used text messages, social media, and calling her work phone to try and get a response. But there was still nothing from Sarah. By the next day, she still hadn't come home. Her mother kept trying to get hold of her. But as Sarah continued to not respond, her mother knew something was seriously wrong. Everyone was becoming extremely concerned for her. They agreed that if by the next day she hadn't made contact with anyone or come home, they would call the police. It had now been 48 hours since Sarah Walgreen had been seen, and she still had not been in contact with anyone. Ben contacted the police. DCI Ivan Beasley, senior investigating officer with Kent Police, was assigned to investigate her disappearance. Ben told the officers that after Sarah had arrived home on 9th, he had put the children to bed and gone into his room, which was the loft conversion one, and she had gone to her room on the first floor. He explained that when he had woken up the next morning, Sarah wasn't home, but the car was still parked in its spot. As it was one of her children's birthdays, he said he had expected her to come home. A missing persons investigation was quickly underway and a search of her bedroom was conducted. One thing immediately stood out. All of Sarah's personal effects were still there, including her money, bank cards, keys, and handbag. These were not things Sarah would have left without. For DCI Ivan Beasley, this was extremely concerning, as she had left her car keys at the house. One theory that was considered was that maybe she had gone out for a run or walk and become injured and unable to get help. A 5-mile search radius was set up around Sarah's home, going through fields and woodlands to try and find her, even checking hospitals to see if she had been admitted to any of them. In spite of all this, and after an extensive search, there was still no sign of Sarah. There were no phone records to indicate that she had agreed to meet up with anyone that night. DCI Ivan Beasley noted Ben Locomer's demeanor. He said, "Ben didn't seem to be that concerned. The way he was presenting to us was described to me by my officers as quite odd. He didn't really want to engage with us. He didn't really want us at the house, which for somebody who had reported Sarah missing, he didn't seem to be acting in that way." He also said that officers discovered that Sarah's family had to pressure Ben into contacting the police in the first place. Sarah's son utilized social media, and the close-knit community immediately came together to look for her. Hundreds of people from the local area came in to help. One of the volunteers, Sharon Brine, noted Ben Lacomb's behavior. She said, "We were very baffled with Ben when during day 3 or 4 of our searching, he went into the village office to book the village hall, and we thought it was completely bizarre. There's half the village looking for the mother of his children, and he's trying to arrange a kids' game in the village." Sarah's oldest 2 children attempted to visit their siblings but were told they weren't allowed. Lacombe had taken the 3 youngest to his aunt's house, and he had also started court proceedings to gain custody of them. DCI Beasley said, within a few days of her disappearance, Ben had gone to the family court and was trying to have an urgent meeting so he could have primary custody of the children. In order to generate any leads, the police issued a press appeal to get information about Sarah out to the public. But as the days continued to pass, Sarah Walgreens still hadn't been found. Concerns continued to escalate that she may have been met with foul play. Detective Superintendent Paul Fotheringham said, "We have experts with specialist technology and forensic scientists working with us to try and find Sarah." Police went back to speak with Ben again to try and gain a better understanding of the dynamics and ins and outs of the family home. He told them that Sarah would often go missing, disappearing without telling anyone, to go and meet other people. The police went to Neil's house to search the property and ask him further questions, as he was one of the last people she had had contact with. He explained that he had called her at 9:24 on the night she had last been seen. They spoke for around 15 minutes and then sent a few text messages back and forth before they said goodnight. Phone records showed that this was true, and as he was at home with his daughter at the time, he told the police to check the M25 cameras to prove he hadn't driven to Sarah's. His story checked out and Neil was in the clear. It had now been a week since Sarah Walgreen had seemingly vanished, and police decided to check the local cameras, and more than 15,000 hours of footage would be searched. At around 2 a.m. on October 10th, the same time Sarah went missing, CCTV cameras picked up a car driving around. One of the images picked up on camera showed the vehicle with a logo on the driver's side door. Why did this pique the interest of investigators? Because it was similar to the vehicle driven by Ben Locomer, a red taxi with a logo on the driver's side door. But the police had to be sure. They brought in an expert to compare his vehicle to the grainy one on the footage. The expert determined that the footage did show Ben's vehicle. Around 2 hours after it had first been captured on CCTV, the same vehicle was seen coming back. This appeared to contradict his assertions that he had been at home in bed when Sarah had gone missing. The home had an extensive CCTV system which was operated from Ben's bedroom, so he could see the goings-on throughout the house. DCI Beasley said it was quite an elaborate setup. He had cameras at the side, at the front, and at the back of his house, all controlled by an assistant which was kept in his bedroom, which was in the converted attic part of the house. They checked the footage from the day Sarah had vanished. Ben was seen coming home, and nobody else was seen entering the property before Sarah came back. It wasn't just their home that had security cameras. Their neighbor's home did too. The neighbor's home had 3 months' worth of footage to watch. They could see that the CCTV camera from Ben and Sarah's home had been on almost constantly in the time leading up to Sarah going missing. The footage from the neighbor's house showed the infrared light coming from Ben's cameras, and also showed that after midnight on the day she had last been seen, Ben's cameras had been switched off. Ben said the files from the cameras at his house weren't usable as they had been corrupted, and that the complex system in place actually hadn't been working for the past year. Another piece of footage that stood out to investigators showed him coming home. In the footage, his vehicle was clean. After taking the children to school the next day, the car was caught on CCTV again, and this time there was mud and dirt on the sides and wheels. At around 10:30, he went to the office where his taxi company operated. When the car pulls in, the dirt is gone. Another element that stood out was after watching the neighbor's camera, the police learned that he would always park his car in the same spot until the night Sarah had gone missing. That night, he parked it at the back of the property, somewhere not covered by the neighbor's CCTV. The task in front of the officers was huge. They didn't know where Ben had driven to that night and what he had done in the 2-hour window, and Sarah still hadn't been found. The police believed that he had murdered Sarah and then driven her body to a deposition site. On December 20th, the decision was made to arrest Ben Lecumber on suspicion of the murder of Sarah Wellgreen. He was then taken to the station to be questioned. Over the next 7 hours, he was interviewed by investigators. Lecumber was silent and refused to answer any question put to him. During a search of the house, a shovel was found in the garden shed that appeared to be brand new. They needed to find Sarah, ascertain the cause of death, and prove that this had been done deliberately by Ben Lecumber. Specialists from the fire service and marine units from all over the country were drafted into the extensive searches to try and find her, including part of the Thames and land near the Blue Water Shopping Center. Roads were closed off while searches were conducted and 1,400 sites were searched, but none led to Sarah's body. In spite of this, and on the basis of the case that had been built, on the December 28, 2018, Ben Lecumber was charged with the murder of Sarah Wellgreen. At Woolwich Crown Court, the trial of Ben Lecumber would begin. Prosecutor Alex Morgan QC would say in a documentary about the case, "Having a trial with nobody presents unique challenges." One of the key moments for the prosecution was revealing a conversation that Ben had had with police several days before his arrest. They had requested his phone. He signed a consent form but then refused to give consent for deleted data to be retrieved. He told them that he would give it to them the next day at the station because it was late and he wanted to go to bed. But CCTV revealed that Ben hadn't gone to bed. His car was spotted parked by the River Thames later night trying to get rid of something police believe was his mobile phone. Following Sarah going missing, Lecumber was captured on a CCTV camera in a shop buying a new phone in the exact same make that he put his old SIM card into. DCI Beasley said, "Usually we get a lot of cooperation from people, especially when there are concerns for a loved one. But actually, Ben was more interested in the information we could retrieve from his phone and refused to give us his phone." Another element of the case that they argued was evidence of planning was the hours in between him leaving the address and coming home, indicating he had already chosen the deposition site for Sarah's body. When it came to the shovel that had been found during the search, the defense argued that it was there for his mother so she could look after the flowers that were in front of the house. But the flowers at the home did not require such a big shovel, adding to the theory that it had been potentially used to dig a grave. Alison Morgan QC from the prosecution said that the idea he had bought what she referred to as a gravedigger shovel as a present for his mother was complete nonsense. Over the course of the trial, more information would be revealed that painted a clearer picture of Ben and Sarah's relationship. When she arrived home from work on the October 9th, she told Ben that she was planning to buy his share of the house as her new job would leave her in a financial situation where that was feasible. This meant that in more ways than one, Ben Lecumber was losing control. And if she were to leave him for good and sell the house, he would have been left with virtually nothing. The judge, jury, counsel, court clerk, and ushers were given a police escort to the family home to help them contextualize the evidence and see the inner workings of the home, including the intricate CCTV system. Defense barrister Rebecca Trawler QC concluded their case by saying, "What I ask of you is a lot less than what the prosecution asked. They are asking you to convict a 39-year-old man with no criminal convictions, not even cautions, of the carefully planned murder of the mother of his children. That is a big ask." After 30 days of the trial, it was time for the jury to deliberate. They would soon return their verdict. On October 28, 2019, Ben Lecumber was found guilty of the murder of Sarah Wellgreen. He received life in prison with a minimum term of 27 years. He has never revealed what happened to Sarah or where she is. Should he continue to refuse to divulge any information, it could mean he remains in prison for a longer time under Helen's Law. Helen's Law, named after murder victim Helen McCourt, makes killers ineligible for parole if they do not tell police where they've hidden the body of a victim. This followed the tireless campaigning of Marie McCourt, mother of Helen, a 22-year-old insurance clerk who was murdered in 1988. Her murderer, Ian Sims, has never revealed her body's location. The petition calling for Helen's Law had gained more than 600,000 signatures and high-level government support. In November 2020, Helen's law received royal assent. Under the law, killers could still be released if no longer deemed a risk to the public, even if they refused to disclose information. But the parole board will be legally required to consider whether they have cooperated with inquiries as part of their assessment. One of Sarah's elder sons said, "There's still that missing piece, and it will always be like that because there'll always be that missing piece because of what he has done. I believe he's withholding that because that's the only sort of power he has left." Sarah's ex-husband also spoke about him wanting her body to be found. In the year that followed her disappearance, nearly 3,000 potential deposition sites have been identified, but none have led to Sarah. The community in New Ash Green has never given up on their search for Sarah Wellgreen. They have said they will never stop their search for her, and a Facebook page called Search for Sarah Wellgreen was set up too. For those who knew and loved Sarah, the agony of not knowing where she is and what happened to her is devastating. It is the hope of Sarah's family that he will one day reveal her whereabouts so that she can finally be brought home and laid to rest. Savannah Gray Wind was born on August 9, 1995, in Belcourt, North Dakota. Her parents, Norberta and Joe Gray Wind, were Native Americans. She was a member of the Spirit Lake Sioux tribe. Shortly after Savannah's birth, the family moved to Fargo, but they returned to the reservation when she was 9 years old. Growing up in a vibrant, multicultural community rich with colorful traditions, Savannah was immersed in nature and surrounded by the love of her family, which she valued above all else. This circle also included her grandparents and 3 siblings. Savannah was a horse enthusiast with a caring soul and was known as a committed student with average performance at Warwick Public High School. It was during her studies there that she met Ashton Matheny, who, like her, was a member of the Spirit Lake Sioux tribe. Their romance quickly blossomed, and by 2010, they were certain they had found the love of their lives. Though they dreamed of starting a home together, it was still early. However, Ashton's daily interactions with Savannah gave him a glimpse of her maternal instincts, as she adored children, particularly her nephews, whom she helped raise with great joy. Later, Savannah attended Lakes Region State College and earned a degree as a certified nursing assistant, which led to employment at a senior care home. When the home was acquired by a large American company, she was transferred to Fargo in January 2016. To keep Savannah company, her entire family moved to Fargo, renting a modest ground floor apartment. At that time, Ashton lived and worked in Minneapolis, about 270 miles away, making efforts to visit her regularly. During these visits, they discussed saving money to eventually move in together. In the apartment above Savannah's lived the couple Brooke and William. Brooke, born on July 4, 1979, had a troubled past despite growing up in a normal family in Florida. She was always a problematic young woman, and her relationships over the last 2 decades showed she was obsessive, had poorly controlled aggression, and a knack for intimidating people. At 17, in 1995, Brooke gave birth to a daughter from her relationship with Aaron Edwards. After becoming a mother, she worked as a pet store animal technician and a sales representative. However, one day, she left the state without explanation, abandoning her husband and daughter. She then led a life on the fringes of the law, ending up imprisoned in Missouri for passing bad checks and later in Texas for violating parole while working as a waitress in a Chinese restaurant. When her daughter turned 14, Brooke had some virtual conversations with her through a social network, maintaining brief contact, always behind Aaron's back, who hadn't heard from his ex-wife since she left. Throughout those years, Brooke had numerous lovers, which she boasted about until she remarried in 2006, this time to Carl Cruz, a carpenter from Minnesota. The couple had 2 children, and Brooke worked as Carl's administrative assistant. After 3 years, Brooke left for a period, and upon her return, Carl discovered she kept meticulous records and diaries detailing rather peculiar matters. The most shocking entries included detailed accounts of her various lovers and, more disturbingly, comprehensive reports on births and pregnancy terminations. Brooke kept meticulous notes that included a list of items needed to dispose of an unborn child: scissors, knives, tweezers, gloves, and oxytocin to induce contractions or cause a miscarriage. In 2010 and 2011, she visited Australia, and during one of these trips, she suffered a spontaneous miscarriage. Doctors informed her that she could no longer have children. At the end of that year and the beginning of the next, Brooke was arrested for attacking her husband, Carl, with a knife. After regaining her freedom, she traveled back to Australia using a false identity. In a sworn statement during a custody battle for their 2 children, Carl wrote that she often fled from her problems, citing her trips to Australia as an example. Living life on her terms, Brooke met Andrew Murray, a chef from Katoomba, through a dating app. She quickly moved to the Blue Mountains and married him. However, Andrew soon discovered the countless lies surrounding his new wife, who had concealed her true identity, the fact that she had children, and that she had been previously married. Despite her deceit, Andrew fell in love and decided to salvage their relationship. He stood by Brooke's side but soon grew uneasy about her obsession with real-life crimes. Brooke's fixation on criminal psychology and famous criminals became her sole reading material and favorite conversation topic. Initially, Andrew saw it as a peculiar but harmless hobby, but his perspective shifted when she began threatening him. Andrew became alarmed as her behavior grew increasingly aggressive. He suggested she return to the United States to care for her children, but this only worsened the situation. Brooke threatened to report him to the authorities and attempted to terrorize him, making him believe the police were after him. Exhausted by her delusions, Andrew went to the nearest police station, offering to cooperate with the authorities, as he had nothing to hide. The officers informed him there were no charges against him and suggested something was wrong with his wife. Andrew recounted the torment he endured, including threatening texts and immigration documents with false names. 6 months and 10 days passed from Brooke's arrival in Australia until her return to the United States in October 2012. Back in the US, Andrew maintained contact with Brooke for 2 weeks, contemplating a move to reconcile their marriage. However, he soon realized it was futile. Concerned by her erratic behavior, he alerted the Fargo police about the potential danger she posed. However, the police seemed indifferent to his warnings. Eventually, Andrew severed ties with Brooke and moved on. Back in the US, Brooke engaged in a prolonged custody battle with Carl for their 2 children. Around the same time, in late 2012, she began a relationship with William, a few years younger than her. Details about William's background are sparse, but it is known that he had recently completed a sentence for child neglect and abuse after bringing his son to the hospital in January 2011 with fractures near his right ear. The whirlwind romance led Brooke and William to move into an apartment in the same Fargo building where Savannah's family lived. William, blinded by what he believed to be unbreakable love, dreamed of building a home and family with Brooke. Although Brooke initially reciprocated William's feelings, she hid her significant difficulties in conceiving. Meanwhile, Brooke faced the frustration of the court granting exclusive custody of her 2 children to her ex-husband, Carl. While she only had visitation rights, Brooke made a living through temporary jobs, either in stores or various nursing homes. Over the months, her feelings toward William changed, as reflected in her diary. On December 23, 2014, she was diagnosed with anxiety at a Fargo medical center and was told she had post-traumatic stress disorder. To make matters worse, the following year, Brooke received a medical report about a growth in her gallbladder, darkening her mood even further. By that time, she wrote in her personal notes about a shadow that seemed to be consuming her true personality. Throughout that year and the next 2, their relationship oscillated between routine calm and occasional conflicts. Given the tragic events that later unfolded, investigators believe Brooke was likely seeking a solution to fulfill her desire to be a mother again and to prevent William from leaving her. While Brooke's life seemed to be spiraling into chaos, Savannah and her boyfriend Ashton's relationship appeared increasingly promising. At the beginning of 2017, they received the wonderful news that they were expecting their first child. The family's jubilant reaction to the news only heightened the couple's excitement for their bright future. Ashton doubled his efforts to achieve their long-awaited independence and marriage. In the fall of 2017, the doctor informed them they would have a girl, filling them with joy. Around that time, their upstairs neighbor, with whom Savannah's family had only a courteous relationship, approached the pregnant young woman with an invitation to smoke an illegal substance. Savannah refused and immediately informed her family about the absurd proposal, especially given her advanced pregnancy. From that moment, Norberta and Joe, Savannah's parents, viewed Brooke and her boyfriend William with suspicion. Saturday, August 19, 2017, began like any other day. At 22 and in her 8th month of pregnancy, Savannah looked radiant but understandably tired. She eagerly awaited her baby's due date. Shortly after noon, Brooke called Savannah to her apartment for help with sewing, explaining she needed her to try on a dress. Despite her distrust, Savannah agreed to help. Once inside, Brooke became hostile, accusing Savannah of mistreating her cats. At 1:30 p.m., Ashton sent a message to Savannah, which went unanswered. Suddenly, the two women engaged in a physical fight, and Savannah fell, hitting her head. The impact left her unconscious, and Brooke took the opportunity to fetch a knife. Using the sharp object, Brooke performed a cesarean section without medical knowledge, driven by her desire to steal the baby. In excruciating pain, Savannah tried to rise and saw in horror as Brooke removed her baby and placed her in a bathtub. Without proper medical attention, Savannah was severely weakened from profuse bleeding, and soon after, her heart stopped. Worried for his daughter and suspicious of the strange neighbor, Joe knocked on Brooke's door but received evasive responses. The details of William's involvement in the crime vary, with investigators debating two scenarios. In the first, William arrived after Savannah's tragic end. In the second, upon discovering the bloody scene, William tied a rope around Savannah's neck to ensure she had no signs of life. According to the reconstruction of events, what is certain is that Brooke showed the newborn to William, declaring they finally had a family. William then cleaned the crime scene, gathering all evidence, including shoes and blood-stained towels, and disposed of them far away. The couple discarded Savannah's body in the Red River on the outskirts of Fargo, near the Minnesota border. Meanwhile, Savannah's family, desperate after countless unanswered calls to her phone, reported her disappearance that same Saturday afternoon. Officers arrived at their home at 5 p.m. and, after a brief conversation with Norberta and Joe, learned where Savannah was last seen. They immediately went upstairs and knocked on Brooke and William's door. The initial visit by the police to the apartment revealed nothing suspicious, so they left. However, a few hours later, still with no news of Savannah's whereabouts, the officers returned to Brooke and William's apartment for further questioning. Meanwhile, investigators interviewed Ashton, whose alibi was corroborated the next day. Consequently, on Sunday, August 20th, 2017, the police visited the couple's residence for the third time. Despite Brooke and William sticking to their story and no incriminating evidence being found, the officers left empty-handed once again. Ashton took matters into his own hands, dedicating every moment to informing locals about the case and asking for their help in finding Savannah. During those anguished hours, the soon-to-be father couldn't stop replaying his last conversation with his girlfriend in his mind, hoping to find a logical explanation for her mysterious disappearance. Determined to follow the only viable lead, the timeline of events, the police took William to the station for an interview. He did everything he could to handle the situation. Meanwhile, back home, both he and Brooke had to care for the newborn, which involved buying necessities for feeding and clothing her. They also began informing their acquaintances that they had become parents, news that quickly reached the investigating officers. Suspecting that Savannah might be held captive somewhere, the police started tailing the couple. Finally, on Tuesday, August 22nd, 2017, the police raided Brooke and William's apartment. After moving the sofa that had been placed against the door to block entry, they found a chaotic scene. On the bed, they discovered a newborn baby, just a few days old, who was immediately taken to the emergency room. Though Brooke refused to answer the police's questions, both she and William were taken to the station. There, William revealed that when he arrived home that Saturday, Brooke was holding the baby and frantically trying to clean up the scene. His disclosures began to unravel the gruesome story. On Thursday, August 24th, 2017, Brooke and William were formally arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit murder, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, and providing false information to the police. Fortunately, the baby was in good health. Genetic tests would later provide crucial evidence against those who took Savannah's life. 3 days later, Savannah's lifeless body was found on the banks of the Red River, wrapped in plastic and adhesive tape. The subsequent autopsy revealed she had been a victim of homicidal violence, though it was unclear whether she died from blood loss or airway obstruction. Genetic tests confirmed that the baby was indeed Savannah's. The child was placed under the care of the county social services and later given the name her biological parents had chosen. Ashton shared an adorable photo of himself holding the baby on social media, a moment of overwhelming joy amidst the tragedy. A candlelight vigil in memory of Savannah was held on the evening of Wednesday, September 6, 2017. The following morning, Thursday, September 7, 2017, a funeral service took place at First Assembly Church. The funeral ceremony was open to the public, drawing nearly 1,000 mourners who joined Savannah's family and friends to pay their final respects amidst tears. Native American songs filled the air as Savannah, remembered as a kind and loving girl, was honored. The town's mayor offered words in memory of the late mother. Many attendees wore red shirts symbolizing not only Savannah's loss, but also the countless other indigenous women who had met similar fates. After the service, a horse-drawn carriage carried Savannah's casket to the cemetery, followed by 10 horses, one of which was riderless. Only Savannah's family attended the burial, placing various items on her coffin according to their tribal beliefs to accompany her on her journey to the afterlife. In later interviews, Ashton shared that he suffered from recurring nightmares following the tragic events. However, the support from friends and the community was overwhelming. One significant gesture was the creation of a fundraising account in his and his baby's names to help cover essential expenses. Granted legal custody of the baby, Ashton focused on her well-being. With the help of Savannah's parents, he spent his days bathing, feeding, and changing the baby, ensuring she had everything she needed. As he later shared with the media, Ashton realized he had become both father and mother. Brooke's trial began in early December 2017 at the Fargo courthouse. At 6 months old, Savannah's baby was seen in her father's arms during the hearings, where Ashton learned in detail the twisted circumstances of Savannah's death. The prosecutor emphasized that Savannah's baby took her first breath as her mother took her last, seeking a life sentence without parole for Brooke, whom she called dangerous and heartless. Brooke's attorney requested life with the possibility of parole, arguing that in his 38-year career, he believed everyone could change, pointing to Brooke's acceptance of responsibility. In February 2018, at the sentencing hearing, moments before the judge announced the verdict, Brooke apologized to Savannah's family for the pain she had caused. She acknowledged there was no excuse or way to undo her actions. Ultimately, Brooke was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole for the crime against Savannah. William, having accepted a plea deal and cooperated fully with the investigation, avoided charges of conspiracy to commit murder and to take the baby. Instead, he faced lesser charges of conspiracy to kidnap the baby and providing false information to investigators. However, the judge designated William as a particularly dangerous offender due to his prior conviction for child neglect and abuse, increasing his sentencing possibilities from 20 years to life imprisonment. During his sentencing hearing, William expressed deep remorse. However, during the victim impact statement, Savannah's mother expressed that William's supposed remorse was insufficient. She urged the judge to apply the full weight of the law, condemning William and his girlfriend's actions as atrocious and twisted. The judge heeded her plea, sentencing 33-year-old William to life imprisonment as a particularly dangerous offender. Despite this, he was given the possibility of parole. William later appealed his status as a particularly dangerous offender, and in August 2019, the North Dakota Supreme Court ruled that the designation was inappropriate. Consequently, a new sentencing was ordered. The second hearing took place on October 7, 2019. Although the judge disagreed with the decision, he aimed to be as severe as possible, sentencing William to 20 years in prison. Beyond the court and complex judicial processes, Savannah's loved ones strove to regain a sense of normalcy, especially because they believed that Savannah's baby deserved a full life, not one overshadowed by grief. For Ashton, every moment with his daughter was particularly precious after surviving such a nightmare. After enduring such a stressful and painful time, Ashton told the press he felt relieved that life for both of them had become much more tranquil and stable. The young father devoted himself to studying business administration at a local community college. Given their financial constraints, Ashton was looking for a better-paying job alongside his obligations. He was very grateful for the support from the fundraising account, using the money to buy a vehicle and renovate their modest home. Shannon Claire LeBeau was born on October 31, 1975 in Miller, South Dakota. His mother, Sally LeBeau, was from California and married a man named Gerald Anderson and had 5 children. In 1966, Gerald was struck by a piece of heavy equipment in a construction accident and died at the age of 30. Sally became widowed at the age of 28 and became solely responsible for her 5 children, who ranged in age from 6 months to 8 years. She then packed up and resettled on a friend's farm in South Dakota. There she met Val Claire LeBeau, nicknamed Blondie. He was a postal carrier and the two would have 2 more children, Shannon in 1975 and Josh in 1977. Val Claire possessed a Jekyll and Hyde personality and was an alcoholic. He was a Vietnam vet and suffered from hallucinations and flashbacks, especially when he drank. Eventually, Sally would also work at the post office, divorce Blondie, and transfer from South Dakota to another post office in Thousand Oaks. Her father was there, dying of cancer, and she wanted to be nearby to take care of him. Only Sally, Shannon, and his younger brother Josh would move with her to California. The rest of Sally's older children remained in South Dakota. Sally again soon filed transfer requests and ultimately moved to Helena, Montana, where she eventually bought a small house at the 10 Mile Creek Estates. Shannon, a sophomore in high school who was very close to his mother, longed for a bond with his father, and he even once convinced Sally to allow him and Josh to move back to South Dakota to live with him. Within months, he and Josh began to resent their father because of his behavior. So Shannon and Josh would return to Helena, and he would try his best to readjust to Helena High School. Shannon and Steve Rummel met while they were students at the high school. The two often lifted weights together at the gym, but Steve had a bad reputation. The more reserved and less confident Shannon would become a follower of Steve and his actions. Shannon graduated from high school in 1994, and a few years later, he met a girl named Leslie and the couple had a baby girl, but they would never marry. The pair fought frequently and at times, their arguments were volatile. For starters, Leslie didn't like Shannon's choice of friends, particularly his association with Steve. Shannon and Steve would drink at dingy places and would get into arguments when Shannon stopped his generosity and refused to buy Steve additional drinks. Leslie and Shannon would split up, and she told him that he needed to grow up, take on more responsibility, and be more serious about accepting his role as a father. Around that time, Shannon and his own father became further estranged. When Blondie visited his newborn granddaughter, the visit did not end on a good note. Shannon began working as a cook at a busy sports bar in Helena. At one point, his ex-girlfriend Leslie indicated that she was considering returning to Helena with their daughter after a period of estrangement. Shannon was last seen on February 23, 1999, between 9 and 11 a.m. in the vicinity of the 900 block of Kessler Street in downtown Helena. Security cameras recorded him at a local bank around 9 a.m., where he withdrew about $3,000 in cash from the sale of his black Chevy Nova. According to reports, Steve had told Shannon that there was an old farmer who owned a muscle car somewhere close to Townsend, a car that he might like. Steve picked up Shannon, and in his initial statement to the police, he testified that they left Helena to scope out the vehicle and on the way shoot a couple cows. In his initial statement, he told police that he and Shannon were together in the Walking Mall area at about 11 a.m. Steve told Shannon's mom that after they returned from Townsend, he dropped Shannon off in downtown Helena at about 11 a.m. Steve also told Sally that Shannon relayed message through him to his mother that she should go lock up his mobile home and pick up his checks from work. Clearly, Shannon intended to go to Townsend and either view or purchase a car from an acquaintance of Steve's. According to multiple witnesses, Shannon had been very excited about buying the vehicle. 2 days before Shannon's disappearance on February 21, 1999, Steve had asked a friend whether they had a pistol that he could borrow, as he needed to help a rancher kill a cow. According to investigative reports, Steve told multiple different stories of the day Shannon disappeared. He told one group of people that he dropped Shannon off in downtown Helena, and yet another that he had taken Shannon to the bus station in Butte because Shannon was afraid of someone that he owed money to. Another witness stated that Steve said that he drove clear to Billings and dumped his friend off there. Shannon's red 1976 Chevrolet truck with the Montana license plate number 5T31420 apparently disappeared with him and has never been recovered. Steve has a very extensive criminal history. His first felony conviction dates back to 1994 on a theft charge. Since then, he has had arrests for obstructing a police officer, unlawful transaction with a minor, domestic abuse, tampering with or fabricating evidence, concealed weapons violations, and numerous probation violations. According to reports, Steve often made fun of Shannon and his hair, called him a girl, and used Shannon's friendship for his own benefit. Steve also allegedly threatened to kill a woman and stated that his older brother was a high priest of Satan worshippers, who had previously disposed of bodies. According to witness depositions, after Shannon vanished, Steve frequented the sports bar where Shannon worked, inquiring about the investigation. Shannon's disappearance has been treated as a homicide from the beginning. On June 8, 1999, Steve showed up at a used car lot in Helena and traded in the vehicle that he owned at the time of Shannon's disappearance, an orange 1976 Chevrolet pickup truck. When the Helena police confiscated that vehicle for crime lab analysis, the truck had been cleaned and detailed within the last few days. 2 days after the police returned the vehicle to the car dealer's lot, it was stolen. There was no broken glass in the lot, and it is assumed that the person who stole the vehicle had an extra set of keys. It has never been seen since. Searches have been conducted using cadaver dogs on foot and also by air. Authorities have searched streams and ditches, mine shafts, and dark holes, even the cement plant that once employed Steve's father. 1 year after Shannon's disappearance, Steve Rummel was detained on a sexual assault charge. In a federal court appearance in 2001, he was remanded to the custody of the marshals after a detention hearing where a Helena police officer testified that the only real lead in Shannon's case led to Steve. He served his time on the sexual assault charge, and as a habitual violent offender, he must register his whereabouts with the state of Montana and apparently still lives there. Sadly, Shannon's mother died from cancer in 2007, shortly after Shannon was declared legally dead. In 2019, his daughter welcomed a son into the world. Earlier that same year, at her wedding celebration in Idaho, an empty chair was placed at the front row of the main aisle for her father. As of today, Shannon has never been found, and this case remains unsolved. On December 25th, people around the world came together to celebrate Christmas Day. They eagerly anticipated the delicious food, gift-giving, and Christmas movies. Grapevine, Texas, a suburban middle-class town covering 16 square miles and home to about 50,000 people, was no exception. The town takes great pride in its love for Christmas, even earning the title of the Christmas capital of Texas. Christmas Day, 2011, was peaceful and calm in Grapevine. Residents were enjoying time with their families, and everything seemed as it should. That was until 11:34 a.m., when a phone call interrupted the quiet. The caller was breathing heavily, and it was unclear what was being said or what the situation was. After roughly 20 seconds, the line went dead, and the caller was no longer responding. The call had come from the landline of a local apartment, so police and firefighters were quickly dispatched to investigate what, if anything, was going on. Just 3 minutes later, the police arrived at the 2-story unit of the Lincoln Vineyard Apartments, part of the 25-100 block on Hall Johnson Road. The apartment the call had come from was located at the back of the complex and overlooked the fields of Colleyville Heritage High School. Many people had left to spend time with families and loved ones, so loads of the apartments were empty. When they arrived at the apartment, the front door had been locked from the inside. They knocked on the door, but the silence was deafening. Nobody was answering or coming to the door. Officers looked through the window and came across a gruesome scene. There were 7 bodies, some on the sofa, some lying on the floor. Knowing that they could not waste any time, they kicked the door in and gained entry to the apartment. It was in the living room they found the bodies. There were 3 males, 2 adults and a teen, and 4 females, 2 older and 2 younger. They had all been shot to death. Some of them had defensive wounds, indicating that they had attempted to shield themselves from the bullets. It appeared that they had just finished opening their Christmas presents when the massacre took place. The 2 adult males each had a gun in their right hand. None of the neighbors reported hearing any gunshots, but there were not many people around in the apartments at that time. As the police found out across the complex and crime scene examinations got underway, one thing stood out. A sport utility vehicle was parked outside the apartment. After running checks, they found that it was registered to a man who lived 2 miles away in the suburb of Colleyville. News was quickly spreading about the Christmas Day massacre, but they needed to identify the victims before any information could be released, as well as inform the next of kin. The police thought they knew who the victims were, but they had to be sure. Getting confirmation would take longer than they wanted, as the state driver's license fingerprint database wasn't available due to it being the holidays. The bodies were removed from the house and taken away to have autopsies carried out. After this, the names of the victims were eventually released. They were all part of the same family. Sergeant Robert Eberling explained that there had been 2 weapons, one being a Glock 23 40 caliber pistol with a 10-round clip, and the other being a Smith & Wesson 915 model 9mm pistol with a 15-round magazine. This was registered to the owner of the vehicle parked outside. The weapon had been purchased in 1996. The December 26th, the owner of a local spa became concerned when one of her employees of 4 years had failed to turn up for work. She tried calling her employee, but got no answer. For somebody who's always early to work and who never misses a day of work, we expected the worst, she said. Residents were terrified. This was the worst gun violence that the community had ever seen, and the police needed to deal with their fears. Sergeant Eberling said, "We are pretty confident that the shooter is among the deceased victims inside the apartment. We are not actively looking for a shooter that we believe is at large." As they began to piece together what they knew, the truth about who these people were and what had happened would eventually come out. Colleyville, Texas, a wealthy suburb of the Dallas-Fort Worth area, just a few miles away from Grapevine, home to the Yazdan Pana family. Parents, 56-year-old Aziz and 55-year-old Nazreen, had both been born in Iran. They married in 1987 and moved to the United States, where they later welcomed two children, Nona, who was 19, and her younger brother Ali. Nazreen had worked in a salon doing manicures and would often talk about her family with people. Family was everything to Nazreen. She was close to her sister, Zor, and together they were described as two of the nicest people you could meet. Zor was married to a man called Mohammed Hussein Zor, who was also known as Hussein, and he was very well known amongst the Iranian-American community. He owned a large ranch in Dallas, and the family was incredibly close. The Yazdan Panas lived in a 3,000-square-foot property in Colleyville, and on the surface, things appeared to be fine. Neighbors would see the family having yard sales, and Aziz appeared to be very active in his children's lives. He volunteered as a debate coach at Nona's high school. One neighbor said he was, from everything we saw, actively engaged with his children. He was described as outgoing and would say hello to people if he passed them in the streets. But neighbors did note that he seemed to be very protective of his children. Nona and Ali were both doing well, so their parents had plenty to be proud of. Nona graduated from Colleyville Heritage High School and was a student at a local community college. She had big dreams of moving to the West Coast and going to school in California with hopes of one day becoming a lawyer. One of Nona's friends said that she had implied all was not well within her family, and that things were becoming tougher for them, but she divulged no further information. Her friend said that she was aware that Aziz was, in her words, really strict with his children, and would take Nona's phone and refuse to give it back. She added that Nazreen was far more understanding than Aziz was. Nazreen's brother Ail said he had been supporting the family financially, as Aziz had not been in employment for a number of years, having previously worked in the mortgage and real estate business. His financial problems had been going on for years. In 1996, he was placed on probation for 3 years after he entered a plea of guilty to one count of subscribing to a false income tax return. He was issued with a fine of $1,000 and ordered to pay $30,119 in restitution to the Department of Justice. Just 3 years later, Aziz and Nazreen jointly filed for bankruptcy. The case was discharged a few months later. The financial problems continued to get worse. In August 2010, Nazreen had filed for bankruptcy. She told her lawyer that she hoped doing this would mean they would be able to keep and stay in their family home, but the house was foreclosed on. Aziz initially attended the meetings with Nazreen, but this would soon change. During the proceedings, she separated from her husband and moved with her 2 children out of the family home to an apartment in Grapevine 2 miles away. Nazreen's brother had paid for the apartment, as due to the house being foreclosed on, they were living without electricity or water. Nazreen was the only one bringing money into the house. Nona opened up to one of her friends and said she felt like her family was falling apart. The bankruptcy Nazreen had filed for was later dismissed as she had not made the planned payment, according to her lawyer, George Barnes. He wrote in his notes that Nazreen had said to him, "Please don't talk to husband at all." Aziz had listed his employment as being self-employed, even though he was out of work and bringing no money in at all. Aziz allegedly sold the family's furniture and rugs to pay for sex workers. The separation and financial difficulties had been incredibly hard on Nazreen. She had a state cosmetology license, but Aziz had forbidden her from working. After he became unemployed and the family's finances took a hit, she had worked 2 jobs at different baths to try and keep the money coming in. After they separated, a family friend said that Nazreen had done everything she could to remain on good terms with Aziz. They said, with the help of her sister, she decided to just buy the basic things for her apartment. She was a very quiet, very super kind lady. She was a peacemaker. She didn't want anything to happen to her kids, her family. She was a really wonderful mom and always protecting her kids. After Nazreen moved out, Aziz stayed in the family home, and neighbors would often see him working in the yard. One neighbor said he wasn't even aware that Aziz's wife and children had left the home. Although separated, they did appear to be on good terms, and Aziz also had a key to the new apartment and would occasionally swing by to see his children. As the year began to come to a close, it was soon time for what the people of Grapevine loved most, Christmas. On Christmas Eve, the extended family had all gathered at Muhammad's ranch to enjoy a large Christmas party and spend some much-needed time together. One of those in attendance was 22-year-old Sarah, Zoreya Muhammad's daughter, who attended the University of Texas at Arlington as a pre-med student, and was also a member of the Tri Delta sorority. Dozens of people were there, and the celebrations carried on late into the night. Aziz had not been invited. The following day, Christmas, Nazreen and her children were at the apartment in Grapevine. That morning, Aziz had set off to the apartment in his sport utility vehicle, dressed as Santa Claus. He parked up outside. Shortly after he arrived, Nazreen's sister, brother-in-law and niece came to the apartment too. Just before 11 a.m., Sarah sent a text message to her friend which said, "So we're here. We just got here, and my uncle is here too, dressed as Santa. Awesome." She was, of course, referring to Aziz. Just 15 minutes later, she sent another message. Now he wants to be all fatherly and win Father of the Year. Within a few minutes, after opening their gifts, Aziz revealed he had brought 2 guns with him. He opened fire, and in terrifyingly quick succession, killed 6 members of his family. Ali, Nona, Zor, and Sarah had multiple gunshot wounds and had been shot several times in the head. Muhammad had shots to his chest, stomach, and head. Nazreen had 1 shot to the head. At 11:34, less than 20 minutes after Sarah had sent that text message, the 911 call was made. Although what was said on the call was not clear to the dispatcher at the time, the police decided to run it through a different software to see if the audio could be enhanced, and if any more information about what had transpired could be found in the call. After doing this, it was determined that someone said, "Help, help," and then the caller said, "I am shooting people." They came to the conclusion that Aziz had made the call to emergency services. He had then attempted to stage the scene and point the finger at Muhammad. He put the Smith & Wesson into the right hand of his brother-in-law, trying to make it appear as though he was a shooter as well. Muhammad had 4 gunshot wounds to his body that had been fired from both the gun in his hand and the one Aziz was holding. This was not something he could have done himself. After wiping out his family and calling the police, Aziz turned the gun on himself. Mayor Tate Williams expressed his shock at what had happened, calling it a terrible tragedy, adding, "The fact it happened on Christmas makes it even more tragic." Sergeant Eberling, who had been working on the case, echoed these sentiments. "This is the worst homicide we've ever had. These have been the first murders in Grapevine since 2010. People could not believe that something this violent had happened on their doorstep." Funeral arrangements were made, and friends, family, and loved ones flew into Texas from across the country and abroad. The 6 victims were later buried in a private service. As police continued with their investigations, they went to the home in Colleyville that had been foreclosed on, hoping that they would be able to find more. They wondered if Aziz's computer would reveal some information or a possible motive, but it emerged that the electricity for the property had been turned off, so the computer had not been used. They remained stumped as to what could have possibly led to him committing such a violent attack. As they talked to friends and family, they began to piece together the picture of a man who was deeply unhappy that his wife appeared to be doing better without him, whilst he was unemployed and remained in the home he was about to lose. The bank was due to remove him from the house as early as March the following year, and the prospect of becoming homeless, coupled with his wife thriving and doing well, could have possibly been a motive. But as he is no longer here to account for his actions, his exact thoughts will never be known. Lieutenant Todd Deering said, "You can speculate about his bankruptcy, you can speculate about his family relationships, you can speculate about a bunch of different things, but we just don't know right now. Everybody who may have known what the motive was, or what set everything off, is now deceased." Sergeant Eberling added, "We really don't have a clear idea of why he did this. Sometimes there's not a really good explanation for irrational behavior." One of the friends of the family said it was her belief that the murders had been motivated by Aziz's anger that his wife was doing good on her own. The shootings in Grapevine on Christmas Day not only stunned the community and shocked the police department in its senselessness and brutality, it left a family shattered. For Nona, Ali, and Sarah, their lives had only just begun. The possibilities and opportunities before them were limitless, and who knows what remarkable achievements they might have reached. For Zor and Muhammad, they were 2 individuals who meant so much to both their community and their family. The loss of their lives was immeasurable for those who loved them. As for Nazreen, who was finally beginning to thrive and embrace her new beginning, the fact that her life was taken by the man who had vowed to love and protect her only deepens the tragedy caused by this senseless act of violence.